Welcome to WIFTI Worldwide Webinar. This is number 5 in a row. Today we will be in India. We have been in Iceland, Canada, UK, last week in Australia, and next week we will go to Los Angeles. And that gives a good picture of women in film and television. Women in film and television started in Los Angeles in the 70s as a reaction to the male dominance, and here we still are. But we are happy to have so many talented women all around the world sharing their knowledge. And today we have the fantastic screenwriter and director, Sooni Taraporevala, and this will be moderated by the WIFT India President, Petrina de Rosario. I would like to encourage all of you who come on board this webinar to write your name and where you're from in the commenting field so we know who's here. And I also would like to encourage you to write your questions in the Q&A box. Sooni and Petrina will have a conversation for about 30 minutes, and after that we will have a Q&A. And we have a ghost voice. It's my colleague Regina. She will read your questions to Petrina and Sooni. So yeah, for those who are not attending here, it's possible to watch live on the Women in Film and Television Facebook page. And I think that was all from me. So I'm happy to give the word and warmly welcome Sooni and Petrina de Rosario.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. I'd like to start by welcoming Sooni Taraporevala, who's everybody is so familiar with, but I'd like to welcome her with a little introduction. Screenwriter, film director, and photographer. Her screenwriting credits include films Mississippi Masala, The Namesake, Salam, Bombay, My Own Country, Such a Long Journey, Little Zizou, and Ye Ballet, which was released on Netflix earlier this year. Her first feature film as director was Little Zizou, which won the National Award for the Best Film in 2008 for Family Values. Now, for our international viewers, the National Award is the most prominent award ceremony in India, established in 1954 by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to celebrate the best of Indian cinema. Sooni was awarded the Lillian Gish Award in Excellence in Film from Women in Film LA for the screenplay of Salam, Bombay in 1988. Her other awards among many she received is the Golden Osella for Best Original Screenplay for Mississippi Masala, given at the Venice Film Festival in '91. In 2014, she was conferred the Padma Shri, which is the 4th highest civilian award in the Republic of India for her outstanding contribution to script writing, and is a member of the Academy of Motion Arts and Sciences. And welcome, Sooni. Before we start, I'd also like to give a WIFTI shout out to Ava DuVernay, who has been elected to represent the director's branch of the Academy of Motion Pictures and Art Science on its board of governors. So shout out from WIFT India and WIFTI all around the world. Sooni, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time out to be a part of this webinar. Thank you mostly for being our first advisory when we started out with WIFT in India.
Thank you so much, Petrina.
You know, those who are your fans, we know your story. You know, we follow you so closely. We watch all the films you write and that are released by you. But I'd like to know, how did this start? I mean, what was your journey into writing? Was it something you always wanted to do? Were you one of those girls in school who knew, with those intelligent girls, that this is what I'm going to do when I grow up?
Very far from it, Petrina. Mira's father used to call me a rudderless ship because I really had no clue what I was doing. When I went to America, I thought I'd be a criminal lawyer. Then I discovered film. and photography. Photography was always a passion because I grew up with photography. And writing, I've always written. I mean, there's never been a time that I haven't. I wrote a book with my best friend in school, Rashida, when we were on the 4th standard, and we had grand plans of publishing it and making a lot of money. So I've always written, but never thought of myself as being a professional writer. I don't know why, but never did. It was only later when I wrote Salam, Bombay, that was my first screenplay, and it was, of course, very successful, that I became a professional writer and found I had a career as a screenwriter.
So from having not thought about, writing to writing, and then not only just writing Salam, Bombay, but going on to make it such a successful script, did that change you into becoming an ambitious writer?
I don't think you could ever use the term ambition with me, because I think I've been pretty laid back and things have happened to me accidentally, which is a bit obscene because so many people really are desperate to become screenwriters, and I kind of just stumbled onto it, which doesn't seem fair even to me. But that is the way it happened. But what did happen is, after Salam, Bombay, I found that I had a career and I could make, I could make money. Before that, I was a photographer, and it was extremely difficult to be a photographer in India, not doing commercial work, doing documentary work, doing kind of photojournalism. Equipment was expensive, you had to chase after money, etc. And for me, screenwriting came as a huge bonus, actually, because it paid far better than photography. And I found I had a career with which I could be financially independent. So that was a big deal for me. So after Salam, Bombay, I was in LA for many years, on and off, traveling back and forth. And I had a wonderful agent called Brad Gross, and he sent me out to all the studios. I went to all the studio lots. It was great, and got a lot of scripts that were commissioned that paid very well, but never got made. It's the typical LA story. It's, writers call it development hell. And some writers spend their entire lives making a pretty good living, but never seeing anything produced. Luckily, I was not in that situation. And anyway, after that, I left and came back to India permanently in '92.
So having graduated from Harvard, and then you spent the first 20 years of your career life, because you were writing, and you were writing scripts for studios like HBO and staying in LA. When you came back to India, did you have to adapt to the Indian film industry style of writing? Because the stories in the 90s were at a particular style. Did you get work in Bollywood?
No. I didn't adapt because I didn't work in Bollywood. I think it was mutual. I don't think Bollywood had any use for me, and I didn't think I was suited for Bollywood. What happened was, when I came back, I thought all my America jobs would dry up, but actually the reverse happened. I started getting a lot of jobs that originated in America, but that I could write sitting in India. So I was in this very weird kind of individual space where I was neither here nor there. But it was wonderful. After I came back, I think 2 weeks after I came back, I got a job with Disney adapting a book, and they flew me first class to LA for one meeting. And then I got to stay at the Chateau Marmont, and I got to fly first class back. Those golden days of development are over, but I'm very happy to have experienced them.
I was going to say, and the way the things are going now, they probably put you on a Zoom call for any meeting.
Yeah.
And if we had web then and Zoom then, I don't think they would have put you on a... Cost cutting is always a producer's middle name. So,
well, development at that time didn't seem to have any cost factored in, because this was for one meeting, and I don't think cost was a consideration then. So
you've done so many adaptations. Did you always meet the authors? Was this a style? Was this a process in your screenwriting?
I've met all the authors except for, I think, Hari Kunzru. I adapted The Impressionists for Mira and Fox Searchlight, but it never happened. Besides that, I've met all of them. I adapted Homebody Kabul, which is a play by Tony Kushner, who's very, very well-known writer. And I met him. I met Rohington Mystery for Such a Long Journey. I adapted this Disney project was a book called Black Ice. About the first Black young girl to be in a New England prep school. And I met that author. Who else? I've adapted quite a few. But yes, I met Jhumpa for namesake, but only after the film got made, not while writing it.
So what's the process like when you're adapting a screenplay? Do you have to check back with the authors with regards to how the story is, because the characters are all in place? What's that process like?
All the authors I've worked with have been very hands-off because they've been very smart. Anyway, they've probably moved on to their own next creative pursuit, next book. So they don't want to go back, A. And B, they know that it's a different medium. And if it's going to be successful, then it does need a certain amount of change. It can't be a literal adaptation, and they're smart enough to know that. And it's a question of trust. Do they trust me as a writer? Do they trust the director? In many of the cases, it was Mira. And yeah, so that's what. And I remember telling Rohington Mystery, who was a little nervous about Such a Long Journey. That was my first ever adaptation. And I told him it's a win-win situation for the author, because if the film does well, more people will buy the book. And if the film is horrible, people will say the book was much better. Either way, you don't lose.
Oh, that's a fantastic line. True. I want to go back to when you said that, you really weren't thinking about script writing and it happened. So obviously, you have that in you. It's a talent that comes with you.
Not entirely. What's come out naturally in the sense that I think the three streams that helped me. I was a literature student in college. So I learned about point of view, I learned about narrative, etc. I did a lot of cinema studies, which is watching films. And every semester I took those courses. And then I went to NYU in cinema studies. So I ended up watching and analyzing a whole lot of films, very good classic films. And the third thing was photography, which helped me to think visually. And so when I sat down to write my first script, I had not read Sid Field. I didn't know what a 3-act structure was, but I had watched a lot of great films and I'd analyzed them. And I kind of knew how to do it. And so I wrote it as a story and it worked.
So on any particular script or screenplay that you're writing, how many drafts do you normally go through?
Many.
Are you one of
many
till you get it right?
Innumerable drafts, innumerable. For Ye Ballet, I think it was 20 or something.
Wow. So
because things change, evolve, and it's always better for it. My fantasy is to one day shoot a first draft, but I don't think that's going to happen.
It may.
It may not be
So what, according to you, is the toughest, the hardest genre to write?
The hardest job as a writer, as a film writer.
I'm talking about the genre of a film.
Oh, so which is the hardest genre? I would say a biopic for me. I wrote a biopic on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar in 2000. It took 10 years to write, not because it took me that long to write, but it had a whole lot of other things that had nothing to do with the writing, like the politics and the, everything, committees and that was extremely rewarding to write. It was the hardest script I've ever written because you are writing about a real person. You're not at liberty to fictionalize anything. And in terms of Babasaheb Ambedkar, his followers know every little detail of his life. It's amazing. They're really, really well educated about him. So it was a great responsibility. It made me very nervous, but at the end, I'm really happy, very happy that I did it.
Also, I've noticed, because, of course, I've seen most of the films, and most of your work and characters you write about reflect the world you identify with. I'm talking about the Parsi community where, even Little Zizu, your first film as a director, is it something that you're comfortable with, and that it's a subject so close to home, that's why you started off with your directing as that? Or was this a story that you had and you wanted to start directing with it?
Well, in terms of my screenwriting, the only Parsi subject has been Such a Long Journey, which I adapted. And I've written many, many, many scripts that have nothing to do with what I identify with, including homeless, Black kids in LA, and, a legal brothel in Nevada, as far away from my life as possible. And that's actually, I've done much more of that than what's close to home. In terms of directing, yes, this is a story that took place in my own backyard. It was a story I knew very well, and it was a story I was comfortable with. And it's also a story that I felt that I would be the best person to direct, because I just knew it better than anyone else.
Right. Talking about your other stories, like the one that stands out to me right now is Mississippi Masala, because it was a romantic drama that was talking about interracial love, that too in the 90s. It was released in 91, 92. So those were issues that was an issue that was so prevalent, and you wrote about it. Do you advocate that writers have a responsibility towards change in society? They can change mindsets. So
I think it depends on what kind of writer you are. I think it's perfectly valid to be a writer who wants to entertain and not get into, changing people, just making them laugh or making them cry or entertaining them. That's perfectly fine. Right. For myself, I think everything I've written does have something at its core which makes you think or rethink your prejudices, and maybe walk a mile in someone else's shoes, which maybe will make you change your mind about certain things. So I've always been interested in those kinds of scripts, but by no means do I think every writer should be doing that.
Right. But there should be a little bit of a responsibility, because, I'm talking about right now where, the OTT platforms, there are so many. So there is a great room, and it's, I think, a wonderful time for writers right now, because, you can get your work made. But I've also noticed that there's a lot of profanity. I don't know how much of Indian originals, if you've watched, but I feel that there's been a lot of profanity in our script writing and our web series right now. Is that something that is taken as part of the script, or is it a lack of words? So just let's put in an abuse, because every second dialogue sometimes can get a little bit nerving.
I think it depends on the context and the script and the project, because if it calls for it, I think one should do it.
Yes,
if that is the kind of milieu you're writing about. And then if people don't want to watch it, they can always switch it off. Because I'm really not into censorship and censoring writers. I think, yes, we have a personal responsibility, and we can probably self-censor ourselves in terms of not putting out stuff that actively, harms people or, sets off tensions or whatever. But that's a personal thing. I don't believe in censorship in general.
Yeah. So you started directing at 50. Was that a scary thing to venture into a new territory, or how was the feeling?
It was extremely scary. I remember the night before the first day of shoot feeling like I was going into my ISC exam, I had only felt that terror. For people who are not Indians, the ISC exam is like this huge make or break exam you give at the end of your school career that will make or break your future. And it's like huge. For me, it was huge. And that's how I felt before the start of Little Zizu. Pawan Irani used to joke that he used to say, "What happened to you? You've lost like 15 kilos." As it is, I was saying. And my
Great.
Stafford, my friend, I mean, we were both in the same boat, got white hair. So yes, it was fun, but it was also a bit nerve-wracking, yes.
So you didn't want to write, and then you go on to do Salam Bombay, and you win so many accolades with it. You were so nervous before directing, and then you go on to win the national award for family values, the best film in family values. I mean, it seems like your feet have landed firmly into the director's shoes, especially with Ye Ballet. It's gaining so much. I mean, everybody's talking about it. There's so many positive reviews. It's a great story. Tell us a little bit more about Ye Ballet. And I know that it was a documentary before you started off, I mean, before it became a feature. So was this something you wanted to do as soon as you did the documentary? Like, feature film next?
It happened because my son was working with Anand Gandhi's Nemesis Lab, which was doing VR films, virtual reality films. And they wanted directors to make short films for them. So Shubhangi Swaroop, who's now a very celebrated author, she wrote Latitudes of Longing, was working there at the time. And she asked Jan, she said, "Ask your mom if she'd like to make a VR film." And he came and asked me. I said, "Sure." And Shubhangi had a list of subjects. And in that list of subjects was a story about the two boys. It had been published online in an article about these two boys who were really good at ballet and were discovered by this Israeli-American teacher in Bombay. I was totally fascinated and completely zeroed in on that because I had learned ballet as a kid. I knew how incongruous it was in India for boys to do ballet and for boys from very low economic backgrounds to be really good at it. So that's how I did the virtual reality film. And after that, the boys and I were like batting around the idea, yeah, we'll make a feature. But the younger boy, Amiruddin Shah, went off to the Royal Ballet School where he got a scholarship. First, they both went to America. So we were not like actively doing anything about the feature. And then Sid Roy Kapoor, who had started his own company, Roy Kapoor Films, had read about the boys independently and then also saw the film, and we teamed up. He called me in, we teamed up, and that's how the feature happened. And I must say, Sid was as passionate about the subject as I was, and we went through a lot of ups and downs, and it's wonderful to have a producer like him.
So now, what your love for writing and now directing? What's the difference between the two? I mean, what according to you is a better medium? What do you love more?
Nowadays, I like directing a lot more, and I'm only writing scripts that I get to direct because life is short and I'm not getting any younger. But there are many differences. One is that writing is solitary, and of course, directing is all about collaborating, which I love after being solitary for so long. Second is, in writing, you have infinite amount of time to revise and go back, which you should always do. Like I revise completely. But shooting is, making a film is all about the train has to go forward, 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 no looking back, no stopping. It's the adrenaline rush of that. So you have to be quick-witted and go forward. For me, what really works as a director is prepping intensely and then being open to spontaneity and improvisations while never losing sight of the big picture. For example, in Little Zizu, Paman started before we did a take, started dancing to that song, Hey Mambo. And it was so fabulous. I asked Dinaz, I said, can we afford this? And we shot like a 5-minute take of him dancing. And it's just superb. Everything he did, he brought a little bit of himself into it. And I've used all of it. Jahan Battiwala, who played Little Zizu, there's a scene where he's berated by his horrible dad for drinking water from the bottle in the fridge. And his dad goes away, and for revenge, he digs his nose and he sticks his pot onto the fridge handle. And that's something that he completely came up with himself while shooting. So there are a lot of these things that happen when you shoot, and I love it. So I'm always open to that, but always keeping the big picture in mind. So shooting is, I love looking for locations. Ye Ballet had a huge variety of locations. So I love going around, you know, finding the best ones. We had a whole variety. I mean, I call it Salam Bombay meets Swan Lake. So we had the Swan Lake part and we had the Salam Bombay part, and you know, so yeah.
So now, like you were talking about how that scene was improvised by the actor. Now you're both a writer and a director.
Yeah.
But as a writer, when your script goes to another director and they improvise on your script, would that irk you, or would you say no, just stick to what's been written? How would that?
I've been very lucky with all the films that have been made by the directors where I've loved the final product. So I have no complaints whatsoever. And I'm all for doing whatever is best for the film. I don't think film scripts are written in stone. They're not like playwrights' words, which are precious and cannot be changed. Screenwriting is not about that. And the collaboration part of it, I feel it's such a privilege. You know, after having worked as a writer for so many years, I feel it's such a privilege to have like 150 people working so hard to help you realize what you had originally come up with in your head. That's an incredible honor, incredible privilege. And I also feel that, you know, I've been on sets where it's been a miserable experience and there are conflicts and it's not pleasant to be on set. And maybe good films have resulted from it. But my brief career as a director, I've always wanted the journey to be as good as the final product. To me, the journey is important. I'm really happy that for both films, the crew were happy and have had a memorable experience that nobody regrets and nobody, you know, hated.
Oh, that's beautiful. But your collaboration with Meera is legendary. So now that you're a director, does she give you any advice when it comes to directing? Do you call her up and say, ask her for tips? Or what's that equation like now?
I did for Little Sisu, but for Ye Ballet, she hadn't even read the script. She was busy doing Suitable Boy, and I was really into it. So actually, she saw the final film. She didn't even know what the script was. But for Little Sisu, for sure, and especially in terms of the actors, because as a writer and as a photographer, I was kind of familiar with the visual part of it, though I'm not a cinematographer. I know light, I know my lenses. The acting part, how to deal with actors was my kind of blind spot and what I was nervous about. And yes, she gave me a lot of very good advice about that. And for Ye Ballet, just before shooting it, I was in touch with my very good friend Ranjit Chaudhary, the actor who passed away. And he gave me a lot of very invaluable advice about how to deal with actors. So, yeah.
What was the advice? How do you deal with actors?
Meera's advice, if I remember right, was that you always make actors very comfortable, very relaxed, so that they can give their best. And that was pretty much Ranjit's advice also.
Oh, great. So I'm With Ye Ballet is currently on Netflix, and I think it was trending at #2 in India, or right? So with OTT platforms now becoming the real deal, I mean, with the pandemic and things that are happening, do you think it's a great time for writers,
It's a
aspiring writers?
It's a fabulous time for writers, directors, crews in general, because there's a lot of work. And finally, things have opened up from being just about Bollywood and mainstream. You know, though now all these streaming platforms are buying Bollywood films, I hope it doesn't become just another avenue for mainstream cinema, because that will have been a wasted opportunity. I hope the streamers keep uh, commissioning and making other kinds of films rather than just mainstream Bollywood and star-driven vehicles.
Right, because I know from, I mean, being a producer, being somebody who's pitching, I think that becomes a little bit of a handicap when they want every script to be star-studded. So
Yeah.
what's your experience? I mean, of course, Ye Ballet is doing great and you probably are working on different ventures. But for aspiring writers, how do they get a look in the door?
I think by writing a fabulous script that whoever's reading it can't put it down, where whoever's reading it is walking in the shoes of the characters and can see the story and feels, oh God, I want to see this film made. That's the only way, I think.
True. You've done adaptations and originals. What's your first love? What do you prefer?
Well, originals, but adaptations for me are easier. But the only really difficult thing about adaptations for me is always length. How do you take a book that is 400 pages, or, you know, dense prose, and make it into at maximum 120-page script without losing the essence? That, you know, I think adaptation is about craft more than art. That's where the craft of screenwriting comes in. But I love it also because I have at my disposal all this wonderful, amazing work done by the author, and I'm free to cherry pick all the best bits and use them in the script, you know.
And with originals and the characters that you put into a film, what inspires you to draw these characters?
Most times it's real life. Both Meera and I were, where we started out was we were really very fascinated with the documentary, she with documentary films, me with documentary photography. And we both thought that, you know, very often real life is much more amazing than fiction. So at least with the scripts, not the adaptation, which already was a book, but with the originals, which is Salam, Bombay, and Mississippi Masala. We did a lot of research before I started writing, and the scripts were informed by the real people we met on the journey.
So amongst all the characters and the plots that you've been through, any character that has remained with you forever, your favorite character?
I would say I would say more than one. One is Jaipal from Salam, Bombay, and then two from Little Zizou. One who you can see over my shoulder, who is Little Zizou, who is Jaan Battiwala, and Liana, she's off frame, but who plays Liana, who is his age, and they're both my kids. So those are my favorite characters.
So a photographer turned.
You know, I mean, talking about using real life, I used their real life sibling kind of hate and rivalry. And there's one part where they're having breakfast, and her mother, who feels sorry for success, little Zizou, because he's motherless, and she can't stand that because she thinks he just plays up to her mother's sentiments. They're going somewhere, and little Zizou says, "Can I come? Can I come?" And she says, "No, you can't." And then she raises one eyebrow, which was improvised by her. Brilliant.
And how was it directing your kids on your first film?
They were really good. Jahan said we opened at Lincoln Center and we had a Q&A on the stage. And he was asked that question, what was it like being directed by our mother? And he said it was great. She's much kinder on set than she is at home.
I would like to say for all stressed out mothers right now during the pandemic, start writing and probably do a small film with them at home. Great.
Yeah.
So I think we have a few minutes, but before I go, and before Helene comes in and we ask questions from the audience. So those who are on, if you want to leave a question, please do, because we'll open up the Q&A in a bit. Sooni, I wanted to know, photographer turned writer turned director, which medium tells the stories closest to your heart best? The best way?
Right now it's directing. Right now it's making a film, yeah.
Okay, great.
It's,
so
it's totally addictive. And actually last year on 11th June, we wrapped. And I've done on Instagram something I call shoot diaries, where I've posted wonderful photographs taken by a still photographer, Supriya Kantak, every day. So for 9th January, I posted 10 pictures from last year, 9th January. And it's a record of the shoot, of the scenes we did. It's some scenes, some behind the scenes. So I would urge anyone who's interested in Ye Ballet to check it out. It's Sooni Films on Instagram.
Oh, beautiful. I remember you inviting all our WIFT India members to the Kimol Gallery for the Parsi community.
Correct.
It was beautiful.
On Women's Day. Yeah.
Sorry?
On Women's Day.
On Women's Day, yes. So Sooni, you always supported us. And when I got to know that you had received the Lillian Gish Award, I mean, this was in '88. WIFT, we started in 2012, but you were already so aware of WIFT and you said yes instantly. Yeah. And it was like it was meant to be. So thank you for the support.
That was my first ever award and it means so much to me. I can't tell you. It was validation. It gave me the strength to think that I could be a screenwriter. So thank you, WIFT, for the Lillian Gish Award. It's very precious to me.
Before we open it up to the Q&A, do you have a tip? I know you hate this because from past, whenever we've spoken to you, even at our WIFT, any tip for aspiring writers? Director?
See, the way I write, I don't know if I should give this tip because I'm not sure people in mainstream cinema kind of follow it. I feel like mainstream cinema, at least my experience of it, it's all about length. It's all about things that I don't do, which is, it needs to be paisa vasool, which means worth your money. So you have to draw it out for a long time. You have to kind of spoon feed. You have to make things explicit. You have to explain. I think it comes more from an oral tradition where we tell stories rather than see stories. I'm completely the opposite, where I don't want to be explicit. I don't want to be telling a story through dialogue. I would rather be telling the story through the action of characters. I would rather keep dialogue to a minimum. And so I don't know what tips to give to a writer here, but my tip to my kind of writer would be try and show and not tell.
Oh, fabulous. Helene, if you're there, do we open it up for the Q&A for Sooni? Sooni, you'll be asked a lot of questions. I mean,
sure.
And I think Regina will be just telling you what the question is. We won't be able to see her, but we could hear her.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'll be asking the questions. So just thank you to both of you. That's been already so inspiring. I love listening to you and how you tell your stories. And I'm sure, yeah, if, to our listeners, if you have more questions just along the way, write them in the Q&A box. We'll take them, yeah, one by one. So we have one. Someone who says, Ye Ballet is easily the most gorgeous film I've watched all year. I'd love to know how you balance between the drama of fiction and authenticity of fact. And then also...
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course. I'd love... So the person talks about Ye Ballet, and they ask, I'd love to know how you achieve that balance between the drama of fiction and authenticity of fact.
It's something that I've kind of done from Salam, Bombay, where I have written about real situations and real characters and mixed fiction and reality. With Ye Ballet, it's not so fictional because there is a true story of the boys and their teacher, but I had to make it dramatic. And so I'll say things like, I don't really want to go into what is real and what is fictional, but I will say that I had to exaggerate certain things. For instance, the real teacher never broke any car banging because, so there's certain things that I had to, it is a drama, it is not a documentary. So I can't say it any better except that it's a kind of blend that I have kind of become quite good at over all these years of doing it.
Can I please, this is something that I must ask you, Sooni. So that line, Gandhava, did you come up with
The kids say it. The kids told me that when they were first telling me about how they did not understand what Yehuda was the real teacher, what he was saying, and he would say like, squeeze your butt, and they wouldn't understand, and some other student would say, Gandhava, and he would say, Gandhava. So that was
I loved it.
That was all real, yeah.
Yeah. So do we translate for our international viewers?
Petrina, because one of the kids says when he first came across ballet, he thought ye ballet kya hai. So that's how I got the title Ye Ballet. Ye ballet kya hai means what is this ballet? And so the title Ye Ballet means this ballet, but it could also mean Ye Ballet. It could be seen.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I kind of got it as Ye Ballet. I didn't realize, but wow, that's beautiful. But yeah, every time that line came up and, I was cracking up, I was like, this is brilliant.
So well.
Sorry, Regina, go on with the next question.
Wonderful. Do you start writing already having an opening and or a closing shot in mind?
Yes. And I'll tell you how Salam, Bombay, the opening shot stayed as it was in the script. But the last shot that was written in Salam, Bombay was after he gets separated from Rekha. He's alone and there's a bridge, it's night, and there's some people sleeping under the bridge with tattered blankets. And he goes and he lies down next to one of them, and you see a hand covering him with a kind of torn blanket, and then the camera moves up to, from him to the city of Bombay. Now that's a very, very easy shot to write. And in those days, in 1987, when we made the film, it was terribly difficult to achieve because it's night. We didn't have money for cranes. I mean, this is easy to write, as I said, but very expensive to do. So Meera actually came up when we were shooting with the last shot, which is a brilliant last shot, of Chaipao just sitting in an alley and winding his top. And it's such a simple end, and it's such a brilliant end, and it's not one I wrote. So that's how that's an example of how actually the actual shoot can make your script better, and you get kudos for something you didn't write. That can also happen. With Ye Ballet, yes, the beginning and the end were as I had imagined and as I had written them. I had written an aerial shot to begin the film, and all these years later, after 87, an aerial shot is actually really possible because now we have drones, and you can, for a filmmaker like me making a kind of semi-independent film, can afford that. So it always ended with the aerial shot, and it always began with the aerial shot, and it always ended with them flying off to America, as they do in the documentary as well.
Wonderful, thank you. When you write a story, does it happen in your head first and then you write it down, or does it happen while you write?
It happens while I write, and it's my particular way of writing, which maybe I do not recommend to everyone. It's more intuitive, and for me, characters grow and the story grows as I'm writing. So in the process of writing, I'm discovering the story. I don't have a step outline by which I then, write. It's the other way around. It's not, I feel it helps me more, so yeah. But sometimes you do need, because when you're commissioned, you do need to give a step outline, and you do need to give a sense to whoever is commissioning you what the story is going to be. So I do that, but I always say, please be open to it changing.
Wonderful, thank you. We have someone who thanks you for this perspective of writing. And they say, I've been itching to write, but have been nervous. Do you have any advice about where to start?
I would say the biggest impediment to writing is your own self. It's your own self-censorship. Get rid of the censor in your head. Nobody has to see what you're writing. Only you have to see it. So there's nothing to be nervous about. Write. If it doesn't work, tear it up, try again. Writing is the best thing. You don't need any equipment. You don't need any investment. All you need is time and either a computer or even a paper and a pencil. So don't censor yourself. Just write and revise and write and revise, and soon you'll get more and more comfortable doing it. And write about anything you want, but if it's a problem, write about things you know well, so it makes it easier to start with.
That's very good advice, I think. If I have to adapt a short story, someone asks, which I want to direct and write, what should I keep in mind while adapting?
Sometimes I've felt short stories when they've been adapted or have been kind of stretched out more than they should be, because it is you have to stretch it out because it was a short story. So be careful about the story you choose and whether it lends itself to being stretched out. Because if it doesn't, then it will be obvious that this is a short story that has been stretched out because you need to make it into a feature. Only make it if the length warrants the adaptation of that short story, and if you can make much more of it, if you know what I mean.
Thank you. Someone else asks, I recently saw Salam Bombay again and loved it. How much of it was improvisation?
Salam Bombay was not much improvised. We had a workshop with the kids before we started, and whatever input the kids gave, that all happened before the shoot. But I would say that the shoot of Salam Bombay, first of all, it was a very, very indie film. We had a very low budget, and everything had to work like clockwork. And I think the kids and the actors pretty much stuck to the script.
Wonderful. Who's your favorite screenwriter ever, Sooni?
I find
that wasn't me.
Because she was going to ask me these, who's your favorite questions. I said, please, Petrina, don't ask me that, because I always have to rack my brains. I don't know what to say. And so I don't know what to say to your question either. I like certain films by certain writers. I have no one favorite.
Yeah. Okie doke. Is there a way to read the screenplays of the books you have adapted, just to see the process?
I guess, but I don't know. They probably belong to the producer.
Mm.
Yeah.
So they're not public or published. No. No. Yeah, that's awesome.
Sooni, that gives me an idea for WIFT India. Maybe we can do something.
Okay.
Okay. My antenna stand up anytime I can do something with WIFT India. I'll call you.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Is there a method for pitching scripts and stories that are never mainstream in India in getting producers interested? How difficult was it for you to get a producer for your first film, although you did have a body of international work as a writer?
For my first film, it was initially difficult. But then my producer, Dara Stafford, ran into Chitra Subramaniam from Studio 18 and told her about, we were actually going to go with another producer, but she told Chitra, and Chitra said, don't go anywhere, come to me. And it all happened very quickly once the ball started rolling. The best way to picture, I've made lookbooks for everything, which is, I make a document for Little Zizou. You know, I had written it with certain characters, actors in mind. So photographs of them, the milieu, just to give a visual idea of what the film is going to be. Same with Ye Ballet. I had a lot of photographs of the boys as well as locations, etc. Pitching is not something that I'm very good at. Orally pitching, I'm actually very bad at it. And so I can't give you any advice about that.
Thank you. What's your writing routine like?
When I'm working on a script, it usually has a deadline. So I'm writing from morning to late evening, come have dinner and revise. And it goes on, that routine goes on till I come to the end. And I write, I've written all my scripts in the same room where my most favorite granduncle lived, and I feel like his spirits are with me when I write.
How beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
At a blank wall. A wonderful view.
As a director-writer, do you know your camera angles and shots while writing the script?
Sort of, but I don't really write scripts with camera angles in mind. It's sometimes, at the most, if it's a close-up, yeah, or a pan or something like that, but no real camera angles. I don't think you write scripts with, you know, camera directions. That comes later, but yes, I do imagine what it looks like while I'm writing.
And do you prefer writing character-driven films or plot-driven films?
It's hard to make that distinction because I think character and plot should be seamlessly intertwine with each other. But I think looking at everything that I've done, I'd say my scripts are more character driven than plot driven. I would say that the characters' actions determine the plot. It is not the plot. I don't come up with a plot into which I then drop characters. I come up with characters whose actions determine the plot.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And do you have any interest in writing TV series?
Okay.
Do you have any interest in writing TV series?
That's the next thing I'm doing. Starting next week. So that will be something new, and I'm very excited and looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. How does that feel?
Great.
Yeah?
Great, because for once, with screenwriting, you're always a screenwriter battling length, always, always, always. So it's very liberating to suddenly have all these hours to tell a story.
Yeah. Can you tell us anything about that TV show?
It's too early in the day, but Petrina, we can talk about it again before I go on the floors.
Okay, so we do another one with you. Great.
Sounds good. And do you have a dream story you would like to write, and what would that be?
No, not really. I've always wanted to one day write a novel, but that's the dream actually. And I also know the contours of it, but that's about it. And it's a huge commitment to write a novel, and I admire novelists, how they work on their own, especially not the celebrated ones who know that once they write, they'll be published, but the ones who are starting out, how do they have the courage to work so alone and for so many years sometimes without even the guarantee of it ever seeing the light of day? I think that's an admirable act. But I'm waiting till I can no longer be running around on a film set to do that.
How much do you think that stories influence the audience or the reader or the viewer? How much do you think, there's this kind of impact from stories onto society?
I think there is an impact. People say there is not an impact. I think there is definitely an impact. I know from my own life that, when I saw, women smoking on screen when I was young, I thought it was just the coolest thing to do. And I think that people do look towards characters, especially in the old theatrical days where heroes and heroines were larger than life. I think people do sometimes base their looks and their actions based on fictional stories and characters. And I think films do influence. I don't believe that they don't, that they're just entertainment.
They do. That's the reason why I was talking about the writer's responsibility. Also, Sooni, I know growing up as an Anglo-Indian, there were such stereotypical roles that were played on, and I watch a lot of Indian films as well. So I think those stereotypical roles just wouldn't break that mold, so you just knew that if you were smoking and if you had a low back, you belong to a certain sect. If you're conservative, you belong. So as a writer, do you think right now we're breaking those molds?
Sorry.
So as a writer and writing characters now, do you think stereotyping is something that should be long gone?
Of course, but as I said, I don't believe in censorship, but I do hope that this ridiculous stereotype, it is. In the old days, you were either the vamp or the good
mistress, yeah.
And if you were the vamp, you were probably Christian and sometimes Parsi, the loose women.
We were the party people.
So I think those kinds of things have now kind of, you know, the modern versus the traditional. All that kind of shit has, sorry, excuse my language, has now gone as it should.
Great.
We have one last question, actually from Helene, and she wants to know: have you met obstacles in the industry because you're a woman?
No, not really. I've had a very charmed and blessed life. I cannot lie. I cannot make myself a victim. I've had a great run, and I'm really, really grateful and thankful for that. It's not to say that every woman, of course, we all know that's not the case in a vast majority of cases. But for me personally, no, I've not faced a problem.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah, Helene's just come back.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sooni. Thank you very much, Petrina. It was extremely inspiring. Extremely inspiring. And I hope that those who listen really take your advices and stop themselves. Yeah, please.
Please watch Ye Ballet.
Yes, Ye Ballet on Netflix. Everyone, watch Ye Ballet. And yeah.
So whatever country you're in, whatever language you speak, it's there for you.
Yeah. We are so happy, and we are so happy for you sharing. And as I started to say, I hope everyone who really listen to this advice. Stop your self-censorship and express yourself and take your advices. I think it was lovely to be here with you in India. Next week, WIFT Worldwide Webinars will be in Los Angeles, and we will meet Jeanette Vulturno from Blumhouse in a conversation with Jess Konoplia, who is the president of AFCI, Association for Film Commissions International. That time we will talk about Groovy, that is a tool where we can register as crew all over the world. And it's an initiative from Jeanette from Vulturno. They are both amazing ladies. You will have a great time with them, as we had today in India with Sooni and Petrina. So bye for this time, and take care outside.